Now, we are also following some breaking news coming in from Fox News here just moments ago, as they do say that 6 U.S. B-2 stealth bombers appear headed toward Guam. We are following all of the developments with that as well. And as we talk more about the conflict here, I do want to take you out to a post from the Israel Defense Forces, as they did say that 40 UAVs were intercepted by the IAF after being fired from Iran overnight. 470 or more UAVs have been intercepted since Operation Rising Lion, which is a 99% success rate. Again, all of this information and the video there on the left-hand side of your screen has been coming in on a daily basis. As always, so much to discuss here, so I do want to bring in Jonathan Ruhi. He is the JINSA Director of Foreign Policy. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us and discuss all of this today.
Thank you so much for having me back. It's my pleasure.
Of course. And first off, I did want to ask you kind of overall here, as we talk about this 2-week deadline that is approaching here from President Trump for what to do about Iran. What is at stake for the U.S. if the U.S. is to strike Iran in any way?
So obviously that's the fundamental question, and I'll answer it in 2 very quick parts. Most immediately, as everyone's tracking, is the Fordow nuclear facility. It's Iran's deepest built facility. It hosts their most sensitive enrichment, and frankly, it's the last one left standing, given that Israel lacks the munitions to reliably neutralize it. And that is what President Trump has been weighing first and foremost, is the U.S. potential involvement to drop the massive ordnance penetrator bunker busters, which use those B-2s that we just saw the tweet about in your clip. So that's really sort of the hinge point that's currently being discussed for U.S. involvement. But more broadly at stake here for the United States is more than 2 decades of America's official red line across Democrat and Republican presidents alike, that Iran will not be permitted to develop a nuclear weapon, and that the United States will do whatever it takes, including using military force, to prevent that outcome. And right now, Iran has been signaling that they are nowhere near giving in to U.S. demands on that. And then just secondly, what also at stake here is the potential for Iran to launch a wider war, and this goes beyond just Iran and Israel.
I have to ask here, as we discuss the military itself, the power, the strength, how does Iran's military really compare to what the U.S. has?
So overall, if you stack them up next to each other, Iran's pales in comparison to America's in pretty much every measure. But if you actually turn them and face them head to head, Iran has built its military in a lot of ways to fight us in very specific ways, primarily by threatening all of our bases around the Gulf, around the Arabian Peninsula, and our ability to continue to project power into the Gulf. So Iran takes advantage of the fact that we, the United States, don't have the same air defenses as Israel does. We, being our bases in the Middle East, and also, we try to operate in the Persian Gulf because it's critical to freedom of navigation and global energy supplies. But it's a very crowded and contested environment, and Iran has built its forces using all sorts of different types of missiles and drones to make it very difficult for us to operate in there if they choose.
I want to pop this up here on your screen. This is coming in from the New York Post, and it's something that is developing here as we are told by Iranian media that a top Iranian nuclear scientist was killed in Israel's strikes, and he bragged that he wasn't worried about assassination. We've seen a lot of these nuclear scientists that have been taken out during this operation, correct?
Yes, I think that was honestly one of the most stunning tactical successes in a campaign that even in just a week has been full of them for the Israelis, is essentially just like they did with a lot of Iran's military, basically taking out the command and control, the brain trust, if you will, of Iran's nuclear program. People are rightly focused on Fordow and the other physical facilities Israel has neutralized. That's the hardware, but taking out the software, the key software, is more important in terms of slowing Iran's ability to reconstitute the program.
And another question I did want to ask, because we were following that breaking news that is coming in from Fox News. We, as we introduced you here, were getting the information, and they said that the U.S. B-2 stealth bombers were headed toward Guam. How significant overall is that? I assume anything that happens with the U.S. here is fairly significant, and a lot of people are going to be discussing it.
Certainly, in normal times, moving B-2 bombers overseas to places like Guam would, be interesting, but I don't think particularly consequential. But obviously, in this context, as you mentioned, everyone's watching tracking those movements. It depends, I guess, where they move next. If they stay at Guam, I would put less importance on it than if they continue on to Diego Garcia, which is a U.S.-British base in the Indian Ocean within easy flying range of Iranian targets, and it's significantly a place where Trump sent a half dozen B-2 bombers earlier this year when he started negotiations with Iran as a signal that the military option was indeed on the table. So I would say to everyone, keep an eye on where they go next, if anywhere.
And I did also want to ask you here, as we go in reverse a little bit and talk a little bit more about the information that is coming in here. We do know that Iranian officials did issue a message saying that if Khamenei, the supreme leader there of Iran, is targeted in any way, the U.S. military and personnel will be attacked. Do you feel, just based on the information that we do have, that that is a legitimate threat?
I certainly think so. It goes back to my earlier point about how Iran has built a lot of its military forces to target our bases and our partners in the Gulf. And certainly what Iran is used to doing is to go to the U.S. and say, if Israel keeps hitting us, keeps pressuring us, we're going to turn around and we're going to make life very difficult for you, the United States. They did this well even before October 7th, but especially since then, and they're continuing to do it in this war. And so this is one more way Iran is trying to say, the harder Israel hits us, or if you, the United States, try to join in, we'll make this conflict very uncomfortable for everyone involved.
I wanted to ask, this is also something that so many people have discussed, because you always say Iran when you're talking about the situation here, but there is a difference, right, between the Iranian regime and maybe most of the people there in Iran, correct?
Certainly, yes. Speaking more, specifically, certainly there's the regime and there's the vast majority of the people. Iran has always been a country where the regime is about as anti-American as you can get, but the populace is largely not. I think what's very interesting is that in recent years, especially the past 5 or so years, we've seen the bases of open opposition to the regime, the protests, increasingly broaden. For years, when you'd see protests, it was kind of what you would expect. The longtime opponents of the regime, generally secular and urban populace, generally better off as well. In recent years, you've seen that spread across the entire country. That includes generally more rural, more religious people that have usually been the regime's reliable base of support. And their list of grievances continues to grow and grow. It's not just political corruption, stealing elections, but it's brought into economic corruption, mismanagement of Iran's natural resources, and obviously the violent repression with the women life freedom movement is a big part of that. And also generally their opposition to Iran's foreign adventurism. Most Iranians want a better life for themselves in Iran. They're less focused on trying to make life worse for everyone else in the Middle East.
Do we know at this point, as we see this operation continue by Israel over in Iran, how much Iran's military, their nuclear sites, have been weakened? Do we have any sort of picture of that just yet?
Yeah, obviously things like this are always in flux in a high intensity conflict like this, but I think we can say with decent amounts of certainty that Israel has done an amazing job neutralizing Iran's biggest offensive capabilities, namely the medium-range ballistic missiles that can hit Israel. It's very telling that Israel went after Iran's military command and control, and then these missiles, even before they went after a lot of the nuclear sites. So that's been severely degraded. In addition, as you mentioned, most of the nuclear sites have been neutralized, at least for the time being, at least the ones we know about. Fordow is obviously left standing, but right now, there's not much that Iran can do with all the sensitive material they have at Fordow to move it around. I would say it's maybe the sites we don't know about, and Iran is sending signals that they have uranium stockpiles and other ways to retain and even continue pursuing their nuclear program despite all the destruction that's been inflicted so far. And finally, I would just note, using sound military logic, the Israelis are going after Iran's ability to pose a direct threat to them first and foremost. I think what we've seen so far is a lot of those earlier threats I talked about, Iran's ability to threaten the Gulf, those are relatively intact.
All right, Jonathan, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and discuss all the latest. Obviously, we're hopping around here because there are so many different developments to discuss. Anything you want to mention, anything you want to add here before I let you go that maybe we missed and it's important to talk about?
Yeah, I would just underscore the point that, the best way to get Iran to, dial back its aggression and stop issuing escalatory threats is for there to be zero daylight, as we say, between the United States and Israel. We saw in the opening clip there, Trump was talking about how Iran's negotiations with the Europeans didn't go very well. I would say that's the fault of Iran, and ultimately, there's a role for the U.S. to play there. Right now, Iran is continuing to dig in its heels and, basically keep the same negotiating position they had before Israel struck. Because they still think there's room to play between the United States and Israel, and they still see some daylight there.
All right. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us and help break it all down. We definitely appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.